Hello there, I'm Joshua Johnson. Great to be with you on this Monday, October 17th. And tonight, we're talking about Georgia politics.
Yes, that's my check.
Why should voters believe you in this?
Voters should believe me because I've been very transparent about everything I've ever done.
Senate candidate Herschel Walker tried to clarify his stance on abortion. We'll have more of Kristen Welker's exclusive interview and an update on Georgia's gubernatorial debate, which just ended. Russian forces hit Ukraine's capital with a barrage of drones. Cal Perry is in Kyiv with the latest. Then,
but they weren't part of a gang spreading hate and terror. They were spreading love.
Jesus is the focus of a multi-million-dollar ad campaign. It's targeting perceptions that Christians are judgmental. But will it work? You'll meet an organizer of the campaign, He Gets Us. And film is making a comeback. Physical film. Gotti Schwartz has more on this trend in a report he shot the old-fashioned way. Hope you had a good weekend. Let us begin in Georgia. Today's a big day for the midterm elections there. It was the first day of early voting, and tonight, voters saw the first of two debates for governor. Democrat Stacey Abrams faced off against Republican Governor Brian Kemp. Let's get into this race with NBC senior national politics reporter John Allen, who joins us from D.C. John, what is your sense of where the race stood going into this debate? What each candidate needed to do to cement their chances of winning?
Well, Joshua, this is a race that Brian Kemp has consistently led in the polls by sort of high single digits, 7 points or so. And, you know, what he needed to do in this debate is not lose a whole lot of ground. And what Stacey Abrams needed to do in this debate was upset the apple cart a little bit. What we've seen in Georgia, and we've seen this in some other states as well, some where it's true of the Democratic candidates, others where it's true of the Republican candidates. But in a state with a gubernatorial and a Senate race, you see in the Senate race, the Democratic incumbent, Raphael Warnock, is running significantly ahead of where Stacey Abrams is. That is to say, Warnock has a lead in his race. Abrams is trailing in hers. Conversely, Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate on the Republican side, trailing in his race, while Kemp has had this solid lead.
And I do want to get to the Senate race in just 1 second, but we saw that Quinnipiac poll that shows Kemp and Abrams statistically tied, almost exactly tied. I wonder, based on the work that Stacey Abrams has done, and based on some of the most influential issues, what Georgians say are the biggest issues for them, of course, inflation. In many polls, the economy is issue number one for just about everybody. You can see abortion at 14%, election laws at 11%, and gun violence at 10%. What's your sense of where each candidate stands on the issues, considering Stacey Abrams has been kind of prepping for this moment since the last race in 2018?
Right, she's been running for re-election, or running for election for, for 4 years since that first race, and over the 2 years before. So basically running for about 6 years. You know, I'd be a little careful with the myself with the one poll from Quinnipiac. It is a little bit of an outlier compared to some of the others, certainly within the margin of error there in the Quinnipiac poll. But as far as the issues go, there is a governor running on a record, and Stacey Abrams running to say that that record is not good for the people of the state of Georgia, whether that means the tax policy, whether it means the education policy. In particular, she's gone after Brian Kemp on housing policy, and as you heard, what she says is voter suppression. Her complaint coming out of the 2018 election was that she believed effectively that it was stolen, that there was voter suppression going on, and funny business, from the Republican leadership of the state. So, it is a race that's still competitive, just a few weeks out. And we'll have to see, wait a little bit to see how voters take those debates. One of the things that we tend to do in our business is we watch the debate and make a call on, who won or who lost. And oftentimes voters are seeing something very different than the political punditry does.
Yeah, the only win-loss vote that matters is the vote itself, which is coming in a few weeks. Let me ask you about the Senate campaigns. Kristen Welker spoke to the Republican candidate Herschel Walker and followed up on all of these reports, particularly out of the Daily Beast, about women who he has reportedly paid for them to have abortions, including a $700 check that came to light. Kristen asked Mr. Walker about that. Here's part of how that conversation went. Watch.
This is still a lie because she's the mother of my child. So you're going to see me a check or somebody giving a check. So that I'm saying it's a lie.
Do you know what this $700 check is for?
I have no idea what that can be for.
Is that your signature on the check, though?
Let me see. It could be. But it doesn't matter whether it's my signature or not.
When pressed, Walker said definitively for the first time the check is his.
Yes, that's my check.
Why should voters believe you in this?
Voters should believe me because I've been very transparent about everything I've ever done.
John, I appreciate Kristen's tenacity on that. No, he has not been transparent in all of these matters. I think that's part of the issue. I also think the other issue, though, is it may not matter. I mean, as we speak to voters across Georgia, quite a few of them, particularly Republican and conservative voters, seem to have a bit of a mercenary view on this. It seems to be more important that the Senate is retaken from Democrats, not necessarily that Herschel Walker is placed in the Senate.
Yeah, I think the shorter way to say that, Joshua, is nothing matters. It doesn't matter if some of these voters, were high on Herschel Walker because they believed that, he was anti-abortion, and it turns out perhaps he's paying for abortion, certainly reported that way. I want to go back to that clip for a minute because he said something pretty dubious, which is that he sent a check to a woman who was the mother of his child, and to say that it was not for an abortion. But of course, the child that he had with that woman was had several years later. So when he sent that check, he did not have a child with that woman. That money certainly was not for a child that was born several years later. So when he talks about being transparent, what he said to Kristen Welker simply doesn't add up.
Before I let you go, speaking of the Senate, J.D. Vance, Republican candidate for Senate in Ohio, is debating Tim Ryan, Congressman Tim Ryan. This evening, it's the second of the debates that they've had. And you see the Suffolk University USA Today poll puts them very neatly within the margin of error in terms of how overall voters feel about them. What should we be keeping an eye out for in that race?
And we've been watching this with the polling. J.D. Vance consistently underpolling where you would expect a Republican Senate candidate to be. I mentioned the splits before. Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, has a pretty healthy lead, whereas Vance is again within the margin of error of Tim Ryan. I think the real question here is: are Republicans who are uncomfortable with Donald Trump going to vote for Tim Ryan, or are they going to come home to the Republican Party? There's a certain segment of the Republican Party that was angry about how the primary played out, that didn't like Trump and Peter Thiel, the investor, coming in and propping up J.D. Vance in the primary. And we'll see if some of them stick with Tim Ryan and vote against J.D. Vance, or if we end up with the sort of expected partisan, retrenchment that often happens in elections in the last few weeks.
All right. Thank you, John. That's NBC senior national politics reporter John Allen starting us off tonight. And let's stick with that race, because in Ohio, as we mentioned, you have this key Senate race playing out. Republican J.D. Vance taking on Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan. Now, in last week's debate, they clashed over abortion and inflation and President Biden and former President Trump. Tonight, as we mentioned, they just wrapped up a debate in Youngstown, Ohio, which Congressman Ryan represents. But still to come, we'll get to two of the world's top stories. First, the latest on Russian drone strikes in Ukraine's capital. Some reports have called them kamikaze drones, but what are they really? And Britain's newest prime minister is trying to clean up a messy start to her term. Some colleagues say that term should end very early. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. The last 2 weeks of the war in Ukraine have been particularly intense. Russia has ramped up attacks on key Ukrainian cities. This morning, drones equipped with explosives hit parts of Kyiv. A number of residential buildings were damaged. Ukrainian officials say Russian forces used drones that were made in Iran. They're calling on the European Union to sanction Iran for that. Now, Iran denies this claim. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says that denial is false.
Iran continues to lie about this. They have not been truthful about this and deny providing weapons to Russia for use in Ukraine. Meanwhile, according to these new reports, Iran is considering selling still more destructive weapons to support an invasion they claim to oppose.
NBC's Cal Perry has more on all of this from Kyiv. Hey, Cal.
Joshua, this is the second Monday rush hour in a row that was interrupted by the sound of explosions. These were different, though. These drones sound a lot different than those cruise missiles. You can hear them flying low. They sound like mopeds. That's why locals have nicknamed them mopeds. They're basically rockets with a crude sort of propeller system on the back of it that slams into the intended target. The intended target, or at least the target that was hit today, another residential building. At least 4 people killed, another 4 wounded, dozens of people rushed to the hospital. It was an incredibly difficult scene to watch as rescuers tried to find people underneath that rubble. The devastation was immense, an entire building collapsing on itself. Now, as I said, it was only 5 drones that made it through air defenses. 23 other drones were shot down. That's just in the morning wave. There was an evening wave here around 9 p.m. in which 6 more drones were shot down by air defense. In fact, it was something that we could see from our position here. As you can probably notice, the city behind me is almost completely dark. That is partly out of fear of future strikes, but also because people have been told here to conserve energy. The energy infrastructure here has taken major hits in the last week. And according to one government official, he said, we need to conserve energy or soon we're going to have to break out the candles. It's just one more indication of how the security situation here in the Ukrainian capital continues to disintegrate as these airstrikes continue. Joshua?
All right, thank you, Cal. That was NBC's Cal Perry reporting from Kyiv. The UK's Prime Minister is apologizing for a very rough start to her tenure. This weekend, her government rolled back an economic plan that had sent markets into shock. Liz Truss has only been the PM for 6 weeks. She's under fire because of that controversial budget plan. Dozens of her colleagues in the Conservative Party have reportedly submitted letters of no confidence. Some suggest she should resign. The Prime Minister told the BBC that mistakes were made, but they have been fixed. So what are these economic policies, and who is the new chancellor? NBC's Wilfred Frost explains.
The UK's new finance minister, Jeremy Hunt, has been in place for just 3 days, but wasted no time announcing a sweeping set of U-turns aimed at securing the financial markets after what has been a volatile first 41 days of the Liz Truss premiership. All of her signature items have now been reversed. Tax cuts delayed or cancelled, and an energy bailout reduced, now in place for 6 months rather than for 2 years. The reaction from financial markets was encouraging. The British pound rose almost 2% against the dollar, and yields on long-dated UK government bonds fell significantly for a one-day move, albeit remain above where they were when Liz Truss became Prime Minister. What is quite astonishing is that Jeremy Hunt, the finance minister, is now perhaps the most powerful person in the country. The U-turns he announced probably went further than Liz Truss expected when she appointed him just 3 days ago, but she had no choice but to accept them, given her position is so weak. A position that rests on the markets from here. A positive reaction today, albeit very early days for financial markets, and a position that rests on her own MPs. Those MPs probably debating not if she should be removed, but when is the most palatable time to do so, given, of course, they only just acted to remove her predecessor, Boris Johnson, earlier this summer. For NBC News in London, Wilfred Frost.
This week, China's Communist Party Congress is underway. It holds this event every 5 years. And China's president could take the unprecedented move of still being president 5 years from now. About 2,000 delegates are gathered to decide policy and to pick China's leadership. President Xi Jinping opened the Congress with a speech lasting nearly 2 hours. The wide-ranging address praised China's strict zero COVID policy, and he called for faster military development. NBC foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer has more from Beijing.
Xi Jinping is about to take his place in history, set to secure power here for a groundbreaking third term. Addressing the Communist Party Congress, be ready to withstand high winds, choppy waters, and even dangerous storms, he warned of tough times ahead. Xi mentioned security or safety dozens of times. The biggest applause when he declared Taiwan will be part of mainland China, even if it means taking the self-governed island by force.
A party Congress happens only twice in a decade, so there's always a lot of pageantry and rarely any surprises.
Xi's ambitions to build a socialist superpower come at a crucial time for China, facing criticism over ties to Russia and hostile relations with the U.S.
His view is that China is basically an equal of the United States now and should be treated as such by the U.S.
Here, people have been hoping Xi might ease the stifling zero COVID policy. Instead, he praised it. Just last week, censors raced to scrub images of a protest banner, a rare sight in Beijing, that lamented constant lockdowns and said, "We want freedom." Even to report on the Congress,
always a COVID test,
meant taking multiple COVID tests and spending 2 days at a quarantine hell. Inside the Great Hall this week, China's plans will take shape behind firmly closed doors. Xi Jinping will extend his rule for as long as he chooses, his power uncontested and complete. Janice Mackey-Frere, NBC News, Beijing.
We'll get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including the upcoming sentencing of former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, and children returning to school after Hurricane Ian devastated southwest Florida. Tonight's headlines begin with Steve Bannon and his upcoming sentencing. The Department of Justice is proposing 6 months in prison and a hefty fine for impeding the January 6th investigation. Prosecutors filed a 24-page sentencing memorandum today. They cited Mr. Bannon's refusal to comply with a subpoena from the January 6th committee. He could become the first person imprisoned for contempt of Congress in more than 70 years. NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian has more from Washington. Hey, Ken.
Joshua, federal prosecutors fired off a blistering legal brief today, asking a judge to put Steve Bannon behind bars. They say the former top Trump advisor deserves a severe punishment because of his bad faith strategy of defiance and contempt. Prosecutors are asking for the maximum sentence under the guidelines. That's 6 months in jail and a $200,000 fine. Remember that Bannon had said he would use his federal trial on contempt of Congress charges to take down what he calls the Biden regime. But it didn't work out that way. A federal jury took 2 hours to convict him. And some experts are surprised prosecutors didn't ask the judge to go beyond the guidelines. Bannon's lawyers are asking for probation, arguing that the prosecution was selective and unfair. They insist he was shielded by executive privilege, a defense the judge actually blocked. They say they will appeal his conviction. As I mentioned, it took a jury just 2 hours to convict Bannon of defying a congressional demand for documents and testimony from the House committee investigating the January 6th attack. The committee wanted to ask Bannon about a remark he made on his radio show the day before the Capitol riot when he said, "All hell is going to break loose tomorrow." And it's worth noting that whatever happens in Friday's sentencing hearing, Bannon's legal troubles are not over. New York State prosecutors charged him with fraud last month, accusing him of misappropriating funds from a charity raising money to build a wall on the southern U.S. border. Before leaving office, Trump pardoned Bannon, erasing similar fraud charges, but that pardon does not apply to state law. In the New York case, Bannon faces decades in prison. Joshua?
All right, thank you, Ken. That's NBC's Ken Delanian reporting from Washington. A website to apply for federal student loan forgiveness is now online. A beta version went live last week, and officials say that 8 million people have already applied. President Biden announced a new site today.
We're going to make sure the system continues to work as smoothly as possible so that we can deliver student loan relief for millions of Americans as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
The federal plan benefits borrowers who earn up to $125,000 a year. It will forgive up to $10,000 of federal loans. Pell Grant students can get up to $20,000 forgiven. Payments will remain paused all this year. The application is online at studentaid.gov. The president says it takes less than 5 minutes to fill out, and it's available in Inglés y en Español, and it will be open through the end of next year. Again, the website for both the English and Spanish versions is studentaid, all one word, .gov. Southwest Florida is slowly getting back to normal after Hurricane Ian. Children are heading back to school more than 2 weeks after the storm. But this delay, plus years of COVID-related disruptions, are having consequences in class. Here's NBC's Morgan Chesky.
Whitney Clapper and her 3 kids moved to Lee County, Florida just a few months before the school year started, settling in before Ian struck. Their Cape Coral neighborhood hit hard.
City officials came out and said that our zone needed to evacuate immediately.
With wind gusts of 110 miles per hour, the family fled to a hotel in Valdosta, Georgia, leaving their new home behind. In the days and weeks after Ian, the majority of public and private schools in the state closed, putting about 3 million students out of school, according to federal data tracking school enrollments.
I miss my classroom and my friends and everything.
Every school in Lee County closed. Some schools destroyed beyond repair.
We do have schools that remain in a high needs category, suffering significant damage. And some will need even longer because they will need to be rebuilt.
Without their homes and reliable access to Wi-Fi, electricity, and running water, remote learning isn't even an option, leaving parents like Whitney Clapper worried about lost academic time for her kids.
We're just trying to stay on top of it emotionally and making sure that we're talking to them every day.
And the district announced last week that displaced or relocated families will have the opportunity to re-enroll their students into a school that better meets their current needs.
I can tell you, and you should rest assured, that each site, before a student or a faculty member comes into those buildings, will be safe.
The governor acknowledging the efforts made last week when announcing the reopening of all Florida school districts.
The sacrifices that have been made by the parents, by teachers, by administrators have been really, really significant.
For the students, it isn't just about adjusting to a new routine. Subsequent storms can take children right back to that traumatic event.
For these students, a severe rainstorm is enough to trigger them months after event, to the point that they're not able to learn, they're not able to concentrate, they're not able to function.
Dr. Cassandra Davis studies the impacts of hurricanes on students, and she found that for 2 years following Hurricane Matthew, which hit North Carolina in 2016, elementary student test scores continue to decline.
What happens to those schools and those educators and those students who presumably look pretty recovered and good? We would expect that they're not, but treating them and holding them to the same expectations that they were prior to the event is not right.
The Lee County School District was aiming for most schools to reopen Monday. But over the weekend, the district announced some schools won't be ready until the end of this week or even later, as they continue to ensure the safety of the schools.
I will not and cannot decide to open a school until we have documented that the area inside is safe for our students and our employees.
Now, students Piper and Tucker reckoning with a change of scenery yet again.
Yeah, this is insane.
A tough lesson learned about patience and generosity for this Cape Coral family.
Use this in our house with that mold and stuff.
That was NBC's Morgan Chesky reporting. Still to come, an absence of Adderall. More than 40 million Americans take it, but the FDA says we're in a national shortage. What will that mean for people managing ADHD? That's just ahead. Stay close. Last year, more than 41 million people across America had prescriptions for Adderall. It helps manage the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. But now the FDA says there is a nationwide shortage of Adderall. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. Symptoms include inattentiveness, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Right now, demand for Adderall is higher than ever, but the country's largest manufacturer is warning of delays through the end of the year. Let's get into all of this with NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal, who joins us here at the table. What exactly does Adderall do to help people with ADHD?
So Adderall it's a stimulant. So, you know, when we treat ADHD, there's medications called stimulants, there's medications called non-stimulants. So Adderall is in that stimulant category and basically just helps It helps people focus and get things done. So, you know, when we see kids and people who are very hyperactive, the Adderall can help them focus on the task and make sure they're doing what they need to and not being distracted and bouncing all over the place.
Can you give us a little more clarity in terms of the difference? I just want to clarify what the condition is before we dive into the shortage. The difference between, say, having ADHD and just being hyper or bouncy. Like, what is the difference between the personality trait and the condition?
So ADHD, you know, it's more than just being bouncy. There's actually a whole psychiatric evaluation you have to go to get diagnosed. There's a whole survey doctors fill out and a whole, you know, comprehensive eval they do for you. It's not just the same as, oh, I can't focus on this, I can't do that. So it is something you need a trained professional to diagnose. It's not just, you know, losing your keys and not being able to focus.
Talk about the problems that this creates. I mean, any medical shortage obviously is going to impact people who need that medication, but more than 40 million people, at least with prescriptions that we know of, who knows how many more people are using it off-label, but what kinds of issues does this create? I mean, is there something else other than Adderall that does substantially the same thing, or is that kind of the medication for that need?
You know, when you're treating ADHD, oftentimes you'll find that certain medications just work better for other people. And so for those people on Adderall, this is a big concern. And, you know, it's not just getting things done. You know, it can come home. So, for example, if you're married at home and your wife asks you to do something, and you can't focus and you forget it, it can cause problems at home. If you're a kid going to school, you got the SATs coming up this fall. You got college applications. Those are things that require a lot of attention and you need to focus on. And that's really where the concern is lying right now.
So there's not a good alternative, I guess, for people who take Adderall. This isn't just a stimulant like, say, caffeine. Like, this is a different kind of pharmaceutical-grade stimulant designed for this condition. So there's not really a good alternative if you can't get that.
There are some other stimulants. Ritalin is one. Vyvanse is another one. There are some other stimulant medications you can take. What we often find is that, you know, if Adderall just works better for one person, they maybe not get as good of a response with the other medications. But if you are somebody who's not getting that Adderall prescription, please talk to your doctor about those other things.
I feel like that's another piece of this that's worth getting into, because for people who've never had to deal with psychiatric medications or any kind of medications for kind of a neurological condition, it's a lot of work sometimes to figure out what the right medication is for you, and the next best thing often isn't even close to being as effective or as manageable as what you find works for you.
Yeah, and that's one of the big concerns right now. You know, I talked to a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins earlier today, and he was saying that, you know, for his patients on Adderall who really want to stay with Adderall because they know it works, there are ways you can play with the dosing a little bit to actually get that same amount of Adderall. So what this means is, you know, if you're somebody who's taking 15 milligrams of Adderall, maybe they prescribe you a 30 and you cut it in half. Or maybe they give you a 10 and a 5 doses that may be in stock, and you kind of play around with it a little bit to get that dose that you're on normally.
How did this shortage happen? I mean, don't the manufacturers who know people need Adderall know how much there it needs to be? Is this another supply chain thing, or is it something else?
It's a great question. It's actually multifaceted. So there is a supply chain issue. There was, at least. The largest manufacturer, Teva Pharmaceuticals, earlier this year had labor issues. The other thing is demand. We've seen that Adderall prescriptions have surged. In the pandemic, they're up. And because of telehealth companies that made it really easy to get an Adderall prescription, you know, whether or not it was accurate or not is another story. But for now, a lot of the pharmacies have put a hold on the telehealth prescriptions, and because of that increased demand they're seeing.
Is there any sense as to when the supply chain issues might be resolved, or how long it would take, or what other options there are?
So right now, I mean, the FDA has it on track for March 2023, when everything can kind of come back to normal. The reality is, you know, the psychiatrist I talked to was saying that this is something that's been going on for a while. You know, he wasn't surprised at all by this. He'd been hearing rumblings of this for a few months. And so even though it may be resolved in March of 2023 is what the FDA is saying, it's really going to depend on more local where you are and what your pharmacy has and the ability to sort of play with those doses we talked about.
I do want to be clear that, you know, none of what we're discussing is a substitute for talking to your doctor about your medical situation very specifically. But would you just repeat your guidance before I have to let you go in terms of patients, families of patients who may be concerned about this or whose supplies are running low? What should they do?
One, like you said, talk to your doctor. And two, you know, ask them if there are ways you can play with the dosing to make sure you're still getting that Adderall. Like we said, if you're on 15, maybe getting a 30 and cutting it in half, and just temporarily until the stock comes back. The other thing is, if that's not an option, talk to your doctor about other stimulant medications. You may find that they work just as well. They may be in stock, and it may be something you can try as well.
NBC News medical fellow, Dr. Akshay Syal, thanks very much.
Anytime.
Meanwhile, America has a much more pernicious drug problem to deal with as well. Deaths from fentanyl are on the rise. Young adults are at particular risk. Now, the Ad Council is teaming up with social media companies to reverse this trend, targeting high schoolers with an unorthodox approach. NBC's Kate Snow got an exclusive look.
A real Massachusetts high school, real students. For their new campaign, the Ad Council told kids they'd have substitute teachers.
We're about to go into the room. I don't know what to expect.
But they never had subs like this before.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today.
Dee Dee, Kyle, and James are former drug dealers who took over classes like health, econ, and chem to teach a life-saving lesson.
I did 18 and a half years in prison for selling drugs.
There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
We didn't come in with kind of like the fear-based approach that Scared Straight and DARE has, and I think that's a big deal.
We went over my curriculum like for weeks, just trying to get the right vibe, the right, words to say.
Now, a lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
I gave a piece of my personal story that, drug dealers and suppliers are not scientists. They're not pharmacists. They're not doctors. They cannot do a chemical makeup of any drug and guarantee that you're going to make it after you use this drug.
The message breaking through.
Like her going to jail for 18 years, missing our whole son's life, it's heartbreaking, honestly.
I don't think that this is taught enough around this school.
Having Kyle as the teacher, he was opened up a lot about his own struggles and his past, and I know that was probably really hard for him to do.
I have been the one on the floor turning blue, and thank God somebody was there to save me. And it was a different level of them being able to relate to, because it's somebody who's really been through it and not the health teacher who's just kind of reading from a textbook.
The PSA's running where kids will see them on Snapchat, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, and others.
The campaign's going to air nationwide. It's going to be everywhere the kids are consuming media. We're going to be on digital media, social media, linear media, on campus, anywhere that kids are, where they're receiving messages on this critical life-saving issue.
In the coming months, more videos geared toward parents spreading word to save lives.
That was NBC's Kate Snow reporting. Millions of Americans are under freeze warnings tonight. This week could get cold enough in some places to set records. NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has our forecast. Hey, Bill.
This is a wild blast of early winter, Joshua. I mean, the fact that we're already shoveling and plowing in northern Wisconsin and upper portions of Michigan, that doesn't happen every year. It's happened before, but not every year. And it's been snowing hard coming off of Lake Superior. The snow is ending for the most part in areas that got hit really hard right on the border of Wisconsin and northern Michigan. And we've had some snowflakes mixing in other areas. O'Hare Airport, they had their first report of snowflakes today of their winter season. And it looks like a little snow is even mixing in northern India. So this is not a big snowstorm for a lot of people. Yes, you'll see a lot of pictures of people showing you pictures of snow, maybe on some leaves, on some pumpkins, but accumulations are going to be hard to come by. One area here between South Bend and Chicago, we could get a band of snow setting up a slushy couple inches, and then also in the mountainous area, higher elevations as we go through tomorrow and tomorrow night in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But the really heavy stuff, some of it's already fallen. I mean, Giles, Wisconsin, that's the highest in the country, 16 inches of snow. That is a lot of snow, and when the weight's been this heavy, we're getting some tree branches that are coming down and some power outages in this area too, because most of the leaves are off the trees, but not all of them. Marquette has possibility of an additional 6 to 9 inches too. So this storm is going to linger. It's going to sit here. It's going to spin. It's going to be breezy. It's going to stay cold on and off areas of snow showers all through Michigan over the next 2 days, and then finally it'll begin to kick out after that. Now the bigger story after we get done with the snow is how cold it's going to be so far south. I mean, it doesn't happen like this. This is like mid-November type weather in the middle of October. I mean, we have freeze watches down to Baton Rouge and Mobile, Alabama. We're going to get a hard freeze. St. Louis, Nashville, Kansas City could drop down to 22 degrees tonight, and that would be the coldest that they've been this early in the season ever. I mean, that's unprecedented. So wind chill temperatures, obviously the wind has to be strong to drive this air to the south. It's 18 in International Falls. And here's some of the record lows we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning. And when you see the record lows broken by this much, that's when you know it's very impressive. So Kansas City, the record low is 28. You're going to be 22. Omaha's barely going to break your record. Single digits possible in South Dakota tomorrow morning. And even all the way through Chattanooga, Jackson, Kentucky, we're going to set some records. And then it looks like Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, that's the coldest for the deep south. We could be about 5 degrees below the record colds for Mobile. Montgomery, same for you. Even Atlanta could break their record. That freeze could come all the way down to northern Mississippi. So that'll be the end of the growing season, which is typically like middle of November. So that's very early. There'll be a lot of people picking what's left in their gardens and getting it out. It does warm up after this, especially towards the end of this week. In the week ahead forecast, we're in a big pattern change starting Friday and Saturday. The west has been dry, it's been warm. This storm coming in late this week is when everything changes. We are going to flip the script. I mean, by the middle of next week, we're warm in all of the eastern half of the country, Joshua, and colder in the west. So a roller coaster is what we call our fall weather. That's exactly what you're going to get.
A roller coaster indeed. Thank you, Bill. That's NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns with the forecast. An ad campaign seeks to reframe Jesus as a person like you and me. What's the goal? And will it work? We'll explore the He Gets Us campaign before we go. Who is Jesus to you? Is he someone you like or someone you'd like to be like? People's answers have probably changed a lot over the years, and an ad campaign aims to influence those answers in Jesus' favor. According to an average of Gallup polling last year, 69% of Americans identified as Christian, Catholic, and Protestant. But 50 years before, 90% of U.S. adults said the same. What might reverse that steady decline? Well, a new ad campaign aims to turn that around. Its goal is to change the way people think about Jesus. The campaign is called He Gets Us. Joining us now is Jason Vanderground, a spokesperson for He Gets Us. He is the president of Haven, a branding firm based in Michigan. Mr. Vanderground, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks for having me.
What's the goal of this campaign?
So 2 main goals. One is to increase the respect and just the personal relevancy of Jesus, especially among people who are spiritually open. And then the other would be to encourage Christians to follow the example of Jesus and how they treat other people.
How'd this campaign come about?
Yeah, so it started with a problem statement, and it was, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? And so a lot of times the perception is that Christianity is kind of working against people, and we really wanted to help them see that in Jesus, there was somebody who had a lot of common experience just like they did.
Give me a little bit more about the imagery behind the ad, particularly the one that we saw. It feels like you're trying to evoke a very modern, kind of urban vibe that sort of gets away from the kind of gleaming, stained glass image of Jesus that a lot of us grew up with.
Yeah, so this ad is filmed in East LA. And, we just took young men and women, white, African-American, Hispanic, and they're doing things like riding their bikes and on their skateboards and running around the corner. And if you listen to the audio is really how Jesus encouraged other people to follow him. And some of the ways that he was viewed as a troublemaker or somebody who was causing problems for others, but that wasn't his intent at all. He was trying to show us really a new way, a way of radical love and forgiveness. And so we're just saying to people, if you've ever felt wrongly judged, had somebody kind of look at you and sized you up based on your appearance, just know, like, Jesus has had that same experience as well. And we're finding that message resonates deeply with people.
Who is Jesus to you? What does this campaign mean to you?
Yeah, so I think what it means to me is just an opportunity to reintroduce millions of people to the Jesus of the Bible and see, one, how much we have in common with him and what an amazing example that he gave us. And so I think especially in times like these where we're so focused on kind of winning issues against each other, sometimes we lose each other. And I know in our household, just that love and compassion and forgiveness that we see modeled in Jesus, there's so many people that are interested in that. even people who don't currently call themselves Christians. So it's just been an incredible opportunity to get to represent that and share that message with the American people.
There's obviously a lot of politics that's wrapped around Christianity these days, and that gets at what some of our viewers thought of the campaign. Julie emailed, I see the campaign as a complete repudiation of what the right-wing, quote-unquote, Christians are exhibiting in their thoughts and actions. Julie, thank you for emailing in. I wonder, Mr. Vanderground, what you would say to Julie in terms of this being something of a repudiation of the modern-day scribes and Pharisees that she's referring to.
Yeah. So I guess one of the best ways to answer is that sometimes people on the left will say, oh, good, you're going to get to the people on the right and tell them what they ought to be doing. People on the right will say, oh, good, now you can tell people on the... That's not at all what we're interested in doing, because what we find is Jesus really showed a third way of going about things. And so he still had his beliefs and convictions and principles, but the way that he loved and treated other people, the forgiveness and mercy that he exemplified for us, is really what he put first and foremost, while he never gave up, his beliefs and conviction and mission. And so we're finding that it's that model that we're all trying to kind of say, hey, this is an example that we can all follow, no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
I feel like that is part of why some people have denounced a lot of Christianity, particularly evangelical Christianity, as inherent hypocrisy, because they know enough about Jesus to judge his followers and say, you're not really Christians. I mean, I think I understand what you're trying to do, but I think about what Jesus said in the scripture about how to evangelize. I mean, there's a line in Matthew where he says, let your light so shine among men, that all men would see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. The best advertisement for Christ, I was always taught, is Christians. Is this an end run around the scripture? I mean, why does Jesus need rehabilitation? It sounds like it's the church that needs the work.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Jesus needs rehab at all. That's what the American people love is a value system. They see in him more than any other figure in human history, this value system that they want for themselves and their families. But, in terms of a flawed Christian, I put myself first. And you could talk to my wife, you could talk to my kids, you could talk to my family and coworkers. And the hard thing about Christianity is you're trying to follow a perfect person, but we're all humans and we're going to do that imperfectly. And so we make mistakes. We commit fouls all the time. I love the thing in basketball where you just raise your hand and go, that was me. I committed the foul. And then you move on and keep playing the game. And I think we could use a little bit more of that to just acknowledge, hey, I'm really sorry. I did something. Yeah. I offended you. I bothered you. And but let's get back. Let's reconcile that and get back to living together.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of flopping going on right now with some evangelical Christianity, which is what some of our viewers called out. I know I got to let you go in a second, but Stephen commented on Facebook with regard to the campaign. He described it, and this is Stephen's description, as desperate to make Jesus and religion relevant, useless, and will fail. Theism, the belief in the existence of God or gods, is fading away. Christianity and the Catholic Church are losing members and credibility, and good riddance. It has harmed us enough. Gays, women, the enslaved, science, progress, etc. Let it die away as history, like all the old gods who are now myths. Stephen, thank you for your comment. Before I have to let you go, what do you see as the prospect for this campaign, especially since there are a significant number of people who would just as soon say good riddance?
Yeah, I mean, we hear that. We do get this feedback a fair amount, and people have real concerns. They have real wounds, and sometimes it's come in the name of Jesus. And I think if people could hear from him, his message of love and compassion and forgiveness, something that we still deeply desire. We need these things one way or another, and we believe that he gave us an example for it. So we understand it, but there's just something confounding about the love and forgiveness of Jesus that a lot of people who are spiritually open just can't get over.
Yeah, I think I will be interested to see how this campaign goes. I feel like people know the message of Jesus. They just don't see it reflected in enough Christians, and that's the disconnect. But it's an interesting attempt to try to kind of reframe the conversation, and I'll be interested to see how it turns out. Jason Vanderground, president of Haven, I appreciate you making time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Before we go, one more story about image, the moving image. These days, smartphones can filter video to make it look like motion picture film, but now a younger generation is getting that rich, grainy look the old-fashioned way. It's fueling a renaissance in using actual film stock. NBC's Gotti Schwartz has the story.
It loads in a jiffy and you're ready to shoot.
Fading for years, this relic of a bygone era is forging an unlikely comeback. Driven largely by millennials and Gen Z on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, all of a sudden, old cameras are back with a rallying cry and a hashtag. Film is not dead.
But there's only one true way to do this story justice. We are going to shoot the entire thing on film. Here at NBC News, it's been more than 44 years since we measured our footage in actual feet.
This is NBC Nightly News.
But now, in our hyper-connected world, many like Jason Cumberfeld, who runs the YouTube channel Grainy Days, are longing for an analog past.
It's probably one of the best moments you can have as a human being.
We headed out to shoot a few rolls on the streets of LA.
You see the image right there before you, beautiful lighting, beautiful angle. The rest is just kind of up to Kodak Gold.
When you hear that click, what does that click sound like to you?
It sounds like old mechanical perfection.
At Total Cameras in Long Beach, owner Eric Vichwar says film sales have recently tripled, with demand for vintage cameras skyrocketing during the pandemic. How fast are you selling these?
You know, these things are not staying on the shelf. The price right now is at $299, but I would say 3 years ago we were selling them at $160.
For some, it's the element of surprise.
I forget about the roll and then I go get it developed. And then I'm like, oh, wait, that was fun. I totally forgot that even happened.
For others, it's a chance to slow down.
It is always magical. It never stops being exciting.
At the School of Light, Andrew Hall teaches the art of the darkroom to students of all generations.
I think what's drawing people back to film is they're finding that they really get a lot of satisfaction in taking that journey.
Byron Lewis is just 6 years old, but can already describe it perfectly.
Looks like magic.
It looks like magic?
And today, so many rediscovering that magic of stopping time with a little mechanical box. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Thank you for making time for us. We'd love to know your thoughts on the resurgence of film or the He Gets Us campaign or the midterm debates or anything we covered tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.